Hi, Stephanie. It's great to meet you. I was super excited and looking forward to this call because I feel like I deal with some sort of anxiety every day almost. So it's just interesting to put ourselves in the perspective of like we're all humans and even athletes have to deal with some things. So can you just kind of introduce your role and how you help our Seattle Mariners?
Yes, absolutely would love to. To your point, yes, every human deals with stress, anxiety, and the way that that impacts them can be different depending on what's going on. And so there's a lot of reason why there's roles like mine in the world of baseball and specifically within the Seattle Mariners. It's something that we really value and we understand that the mindset that we bring to things, right? Like nothing happens independent of that mindset. And so a lot of my job and our department's job, how we work as a team, is working with our players to help them understand basically like how do you help manage the thoughts and emotions that are going to show up, the natural stressors of the game, sometimes the stuff that happens away from the game but shows up or exacerbates some of what's happening in the game. And so, how can we help give them the skills and strategies that'll help them regulate their stress, be able to focus on the things they need to focus on, and truthfully, to do it one pitch at a time? And there's a lot of things that tie into that, being able to be present, but understand like how do you regulate your response to the thoughts and the emotions that are going to come up just by nature of doing something that you really care about and something that's really hard. Like baseball is not an easy game, you know? And so, um, yeah, that's a very like broad overview of what we do, but we try to work with our players and give them as many skills and strategies to help them build better awareness of what their actual responses are in the moment. And then how can they shift that to be something that's a lot more helpful and allows them to bring out the best of their ability more consistently over time. And so that includes things like breath work. We work on things like visualization, journaling, different types of mindfulness meditation. And a lot of that is usually like, let's debunk what it's not and then let's actually figure out what it is and then how does this show up for you on the field. And once we kind of build out those skill sets and they realize that it takes the same amount of like training, intention, and purpose to do those things the same way it does when you're working on a swing, working on being able to execute your delivery and execute pitches. Like once we can get them to that point of understanding it, then I think we kind of have opened a runway for them to be able to leverage all the other things that they're continuing to train.
Yeah, and is that how is that different from, like, focusing on single players and then focusing on, like, the broader group? Do you work in, like, bigger group settings as well as individually?
Yeah, it's to both and. So a lot of times we'll work with the larger groups or we'll maybe get like, hey, we're just going to talk to the hitters today or we'll just talk to the pitchers and we'll run meetings or excuse me, sessions and introduce different types of topics and it's generally like a, hey, this is what we're talking about or this is what we're addressing. But how some of those things present for players can be super different based on the individual. And so then there's a lot of follow-up from the players or us with individuals to be able to figure out, okay, how does this show up for you? What are the things that you've tried? Hey, here's some suggestions of things that we could work. Let's map out this type of programming. Try it out for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then let's revisit it and see what's going on. How is this helping you in the game? You know, because I think that's another piece of what we do too is helping our players. We want them to feel better, but truthfully, we want them to perform better too. And so it's understanding that there's that balance of it's more than just feeling better. If you feel better, but it's not showing up on the field, then there's a balance there too where we maybe have to adjust some things. But the same goes to like we don't want you necessarily feeling awful all the time either because that becomes counterproductive to what we're trying to get done. And so it's trying to find that balance of what works for this guy to address this issue. And so something I've talked to our players a lot about lately is we know what problems you have to solve in the game, but it's up to you and I and the coaches to collaborate on like how you're actually going to solve that problem because it's never the same answer for every guy, even though the problem might be the same problem, if that makes sense.
It does. Can you just kind of go into detail on some of the techniques that you use with different players for, like, different stresses, like hitters or even, like, pitchers? Just yeah, some examples of the techniques that you use to help ease their anxiety or their stress.
Yeah, absolutely. So something we leverage a lot is understanding different types of breath work and how they can leverage that. The reason we come to that a lot is because it's one of the most efficient skills when it comes to being able to regulate your physiological response and the way your body reacts to stress and your psychological response and the way your mind's responding to stress. If we can understand that our breath sort of works as um, more of like a thermostat and less like a thermometer. I think at times we think like, oh, we just recognize, hey, I'm in like fight or flight right now. It doesn't have to be that, right? We can use our breath to kind of like downshift, calm ourselves down. But there's also times where we can get our players, for example, our pitchers, starting pitchers. Ideally, we want them to get through at least 6 innings, and so
Yeah.
that by the time they hit the fourth, like they're starting to get exhausted, they're starting to be fatigued. Okay, well, how can you maybe leverage your breath to kind of get you upregulated, get ready to go, kind of get you a little bit closer to that when the adrenaline starts to wear off, how do you get yourself into more of that? Like, stress isn't always a bad thing. You need that sometimes to be able to lock in and focus on what you're doing in the best way. And so we'll use a lot of the breath work. And depending on if they want to slow down and down regulate, well, okay, slow the exhale, make sure everything's diaphragmatic, low, expanded out. If you want to get going, okay, let's shorten the exhales and maybe like speed up the inhales. Like we'll leverage that kind of stuff and get them to understand that it's almost kind of like your volume dial. Other things that we've done is getting them to understand, okay, how can you use that breathing or like give them evidence that they can use it. We really leverage cold tubs with our players a lot and they love it. Um, so we'll get them in these cold tubs, and right when you immediately get into something that's 45 degrees, initially you're gonna like everything tightens up. Your mind starts to tell you like, get out, it's uncomfortable, you don't need to be here. Are you sure you want to do this? Right? And you just kind of have to fight off those thoughts and understand
Yeah.
you're in control. Get your attention to your breathing. Once your attention's on your breathing, you've now given less power to those other voices, the thoughts, the doubt, the hurry up, get out. And you can start to slow your breathing down. Your body starts to realize, okay, I can be in here for a minute. I can be in here for 2 minutes and I'm okay. And then what we've done there is then been able to show our players like you're in control. Your mind is going to try to initially tell you something, but regardless of what it tells you, you can get it to focus on something else and get yourself to what you need to do in order to complete the task. So while in that situation it's the cold tub, they've now started to build confidence in their ability to like, okay, I can be on the mound in a 3-0 situation as a pitcher. And just because I'm like, "Ah, crap, I don't want to walk this hitter, it doesn't have to be that. It can immediately be like, okay, how do I need to execute this pitch? Okay, it's this pitch to this spot. Let's go. Boom. Um, so that's one example. We've also leveraged things like visualization and getting them to understand, like, okay, how can you start to see yourself execute the things you want to do in game? And there's a lot of benefit to that. One, from a confidence standpoint, you start to get more of those mental reps and see yourself have success, which is helpful. But the other piece of it being that, like, when you can visualize something, you start to shut off some of that analytical thinking. You can't overanalyze, you can't critique too much when you're trying to actually see a visual. And so it quiets the noise in your head and actually primes your body to be able to go do what you want it to do. So that's another way that we've been able to leverage that.
And you mentioned just like blocking things out, being able to be in the moment and perform. Are there instances with players where like the outside world is affecting their performance on the field? And do you guys also help with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question because yes, right, they're human. So of course there's going to be things that happen outside of it. The person is never separate from what they're actually doing, but we try to be able to give them different skills and strategies so that when they are on the field, they can just focus on that and be there. And that's where we've been able to collaborate and work a lot closer with, honestly, our newly developed mental health department. And so it kind of works on a spectrum in a lot of ways where there's the mental health side of things, but there's like the clinical, okay, we need to diagnose, we need to treat, or there's different programming that we need to be able to implement. And then there's kind of that middle space where there's like the overall wellness and like general wellness and well-being, life skills type thing. And I'd say that's where a lot of the crossover between mental skills and mental health happens. And then there is like the mental skills, optimal performance. We want to be able to get you at your best. But all of those things require, right? We have to have like a stable foundation of mental health, be able to manage our well being and life skills in order to be able to optimally perform. And so we've worked really closely to collaborate with our mental health department so that if there becomes situations where it's like, hey, there's a lot of off field stuff that's becoming disruptive for the individual or they're having a hard time managing this, okay, let's make sure you get referred, you have support, and we'll help support that the best we can, but we're not the ones diagnosing, treating. And then
Got
when
it.
there's elements of that well-being life skills, so that's things like probably managing sleep. What's their routine first thing when they wake up in the morning? How do they get themselves going or get their mind and body in a state to take on the rest of the day? There's a lot of overlap there between the mental health and us, and we just kind of work from both ends of that to make sure that the player has the support and is basically trending in the right direction. And then when it comes to the mental skill stuff, that's a lot more of the on field, how are we managing the stressors of the game in order to get you to be able to perform your best regardless of what's going on.
Yeah, and we definitely see emotion on the field, and it doesn't just come from the players. So is this something that you guys work with the coaches and the coaching staff with as well?
Yes, definitely. And I'm super biased in saying this, but I would say we have so much buy-in with our coaching staff. There's a lot of belief in what we do and the importance of it. And so it's a helpful outlet for our coaches and our coaching staff to understand like what are things that you can be able to do because they're performing too, right? Like
Right.
any job or task we have to do is a performance. And so helping them understand that you can leverage these things, but also making sure that they understand it really well because the truth is they're going to have the most touch points with the players. And so the better they understand it, the more they can reinforce certain things that are going to be helpful. And they help build the environment that the training happens in, that the game setting happens in. And so when we can get them to be on board, believe in these things, and understand it really clearly, we've now been able to expand those touch points, and we call it a force multiplier, be able to help build better support in for our players just by expanding that network more or less.
Do you watch every game?
I watch as many as I can. It's tough because a lot of the minor league games happen at the same time, but
Okay.
it's not uncommon for me to be able to like, okay, here's 2 innings of this game, 2 innings of that game, bounce around here and there, and of course, every major league game I can catch that's on the TV or happening on the laptop in the background. So, as much as I possibly can, yes, my life is inundated with baseball all the time, and I love it.
Are you able to actually notice when players are using certain breathing techniques?
Yes, I would say sometimes it can be hard to tell, but obviously the better relationship with the player, the better off you can start to pick out little mannerisms and behaviors that you start to see like, okay, I can tell that he's like trying to be really intentional about slowing his breathing down right now. Or sometimes you watch it and you're like, oh man, that went out the window. Okay, we're gonna have to touch base on this at some point.
Yeah.
But you can just kind of start to tell the better the relationship and the better you know a guy, the more you're gonna be able to pick up on some of those patterns and themes that show up for him.
Was there ever a moment that you could describe, like, a rewarding experience with your mental skills training that you noticed, shifted just the way that a player played or the momentum of their game while in game?
It's a good question. I'm not trying to have an out here. I think it's hard to tell because there's a lot of things that can contribute to it. But I do think there have been times where, you know that you've spent the last 3 days working on with a player on like, okay, you're gonna get ready to step in the box and you're gonna slow your exhale. You're gonna step in, look at the clock, take one more breath out of your nose, and then be ready, locked in on your target, whatever you're trying to do. Um, and so you can see it, when you see him like, okay, 1 foot out, slow the breathing, step in, breathe again. And I can think of a particular example right now where we had a player and he's like just making more consistent contact. He's making better swing decisions. And I think there's a lot that probably goes into that. I know he's had conversations with the hitting coach too, but you feel good about that knowing that, okay, he has a tool that he can use and he's using it right now and being able to have more success with it. And so that definitely feels good. And you can kind of see those moments here and there. They show up pretty consistently depending on, the work and the buy-in that you have from the player.
What kind of advice would you give to young athletes, to help them either incorporate mental skills or if they really wanna hone in on their mental skills to help their on-field performance?
Yeah, I think the best advice is just like start to dive into it. It's a thing that, especially in the game of baseball, is starting to become more and more widely adopted. I think even more so than any other professional sport, if I'm being honest. Um, but I would say if you want to take your game to that next level, or let the things that you prepared, right? Like if you don't have your mind in the right place, it's really, really hard for all the physical preparation that you've done to come through and you be able to showcase your full potential. So, for advice for that, I'd say just start diving into any and all resources you can find. Ideally, right, if you can go find a coach or somebody who has like experience in being able to teach these things, leverage that because there aren't a lot of individuals who can do that yet. Otherwise, I'd say start diving into things like different types of books, podcasts, watching videos, like go find YouTube clips on this kind of stuff. It's more present than you'd think, but you just have to know where to look. And so if you can start to find those things and it just starts to get you to think differently about what you do. How do I respond? How could I maybe work on making this a better part of my game? then I think you can start to reap the benefits. A lot of it is just being willing to dive into it and be able to experiment with what helps you, what doesn't. But you really have to know yourself well, um, and you have to be willing to give it a chance. And so, if you're willing to treat it like any other aspect of your training, experiment with it, try it out, and stick to it, you're going to see the benefits of the mental game, and it's going to make every other aspect of your game better too.
I think that's great advice just in general as well to all of us. Listening to
Yeah,
the podcast, learning how to hone in on our mental health and how to develop our mental skills. So, yeah, that's great. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to bring it back
of
to
course.
you just because I'm curious
Yeah.
how you found yourself in this profession.
I wish I had a cooler story other than the fact that it's just like I played a lot of sports growing up. First sport I ever played was baseball. I played that until like the summer of my freshman year of high school, and then all the boys started to get bigger, faster, stronger, and I didn't. And so dad was like, "Are you sure you want to stick with baseball, or are you thinking maybe switch to softball?" I made that switch. I also ended up playing soccer all through high school and then through college. Soccer was the sport I played the longest. But the thing I had in common with both of those experiences is that it didn't matter how physically prepared I was or how much I had practiced, how yeah, it basically it's like I could be in the box 0-2 as a hitter playing baseball or softball, and it was almost like I'd give the at bat away because I was so worried about like what if I strike out or I'd kind of freeze
In
and
your
then
head.
same
Yeah.
exactly. And then same thing on the soccer field. I'd have breakaway one-on-one with the keeper and I'd miss the shot and then it'd be like, "Oh, well, Steph's done for at least another next 30 minutes because I'm just going to be thinking about it over and over again." And so I knew that like there's this side of the game that I haven't figured out how to make better. It's not because I don't work hard. It's not because I don't have the ability to do these things, but something was getting in the way. And so I started to just kind of look into it on my own and figured out that sports psychology was a thing. What I thought it was then and what I understand it to be now is very different. And that's just come through like diving more into it, trying more of it, and then the education and training that I've been able to do to build a career in this. But I just knew that there was something for me that was like inhibiting that best of my ability to come out more consistently. And so I just started to look more and more into sports psychology when I went to college and I was playing soccer. I knew I wanted to study general psych and did my first 2 years at a junior college. And it was kind of just like looking into things on my own. But then when I transferred to my, 4-year university, I was really fortunate to be in a program where my advisor was like, okay, we don't have sports psych offerings, but whatever you want to do, papers, presentations, any other projects we have, put the sports psych lens on it. So just start diving into the research literature and figure out what's interesting to you. So I was able to do that through my undergrad, and um, that exposed me to a lot of different things. And then my advisor also encouraged me, like, okay, if this is something you really want to do, start looking at different grad programs for it. And so
Yeah.
took some time to do that. Ended up going to get my master's degree in sport and performance psych, and the rest is kind of history. But it all came back down to my ability to, like, as a player in my experience, I knew that this was something that was more or less a handicap for me, and I really wanted to be able to figure it out. But I had no idea how to until I started looking into it on my own.
Yeah, that's awesome that you had the experience as an athlete going through these struggles, and now you have the experience to be able to work with these athletes through the same struggles or slightly different struggles. But how did you find yourself with the Seattle Mariners?
So for me, I was originally down at IMG Academy, and I was working down there in Florida with mostly their girls lacrosse program and the baseball program at the time. And I had gotten super interested in working back in baseball again. Once I had kind of like hung them up and gone the soccer route, it had been a while, but I still always loved baseball. And so being able to combine the mental game with that, there was just an inherent fit. But while I was down at IMG, I ended up kind of a funny story. I got reached out to by Andy McKay, who was our farm director at the time, via Twitter, and he said, "Hey, give me a call." I gave him a call, and he asked me if I'd be interested in interviewing for a position that they had, and he just kept saying, "Your name gets put across my desk. It's been suggested to me, and so would you be interested in interviewing?" And so was able to interview, ended up getting the job, and it worked out really well because there was somebody who I had gone to grad school with who had also worked here, and
That's awesome.
yeah, it ended up working out really well. It was such a really good fit. And I never really anticipated that I'd have an opportunity to work in professional baseball, but the stars sort of aligned for this opportunity and was able to be here now heading into my 3rd year. And it's been such a great experience and such a great fit for me professionally, personally, all of the above.
Now, I just thought of another question in regard to the players and their mental skills. Are their skills different in a regular season game? And do you guys try different techniques when it comes to the postseason?
Yeah, it's a good question. Truthfully, no. I think we just try to prepare them for that environment and knowing like, okay, the thoughts, the emotions, the stressors that you feel, they just might be exaggerated a little bit more on a bigger stage. But our hope is that we built a solid enough foundation and really help them understand that like it might feel different, but the ways that you work through this are the same that you worked through them all season. And so it's more so just can we increase your awareness of how it might feel or what you need to do so that you have a super clear plan of how you're going to address it when it shows up.
And are the techniques that the players used also used by you daily?
For the most part, yes, we try to be super intentional with that. I will say, like, I'm not in the cold tubs every single day. I
Yeah.
try to incorporate that here and there, but for the most part, yeah, I mean, we encourage our players for things like how do you start your day? Okay, wake up, let's get some sunshine in the eyes. If you can add some type of like mindfulness or gratitude practice to it, you're probably putting yourself in a better place to start your day and attack whatever you have lined up for the day. A lot of the breathing techniques and sometimes breathing exercises and making sure we can expand and control our diaphragm. Implement that. Truthfully, that's more like a couple times a week here and there. That's not as consistent, but yeah, I mean, I think the more that we can practice it as coaches, whether mental skills coaches or any of the other coaches, we just now have an experience that we can reference and have a better understanding of how our players might be experiencing it. And even if it's not the exact same way, I think it gives us a better opportunity to ask questions and try to get understanding of what their experience might be. And then if we can understand that, we create more clarity of how we're going to apply these things. So yes, definitely.
And are things mostly like trial and error? Like, how do you take research on and apply it on what works and what doesn't?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think a lot of it is understanding. Some of it is like understanding the theory behind things, and that's I think where the education and the training comes in. What are these theories saying? What are they doing? That being said, I'm not necessarily going to a player and talking about psychoneuromuscular theory.
Yeah.
Like we're not doing that because they don't need to know that. But if we understand the principles of it and why these things should be effective or the conceptualization, then you dive into the research and some of the application. And then it's like, okay, how does this fit in our setting? And so it's kind of filtering things out. And I would say a lot of the things we leverage, like the breath work, like the visualization, different types of mindfulness practices and breathing cadences, things like that. It's all stuff that we've looked into. And truthfully, there's some stuff that we just maybe don't touch on as much as maybe other mental skills coaches do. And not because those things are ineffective, but because I don't have as much evidence to say that this will be as effective as this other tool that I could give you. And so for us, it's more so about like, can we teach you how to do these three or four things really, really well and understand the different ways that you can apply it? And then it might lead into some of those individual nuanced conversations, but I would say a lot of it is having the education and understanding these theories, being able to vet some of the research. And then some of it at that point, once you've gotten it whittled down a little bit, it truthfully can be trial and error of like, how does this guy use it? What does he do? What works in his schedule? Because there is a truth to like, sometimes you have to have the discipline to just go do it, even if you don't want to. But the more convenient or easily accessible we can make certain practices, then obviously the more consistent players can be with it with a little bit more ease.
Yeah. How often do you guys work with the players? Like, is it like an every practice thing, or are there specific dates of the week that they meet with you to learn new skills? Just, yeah, how does that schedule look like?
Yeah, truthfully, it's every day, and
Okay.
we're really integrated as much as we want to be. Like, I wear baseball pants out on the field, and we want us to be treated just like any other coach. And so it's awesome because there's things where sometimes, like, I'm on first base just catching balls that the guys are throwing in, like, I'm viewed just as another coach. But it also gives us a lot of opportunity to have some of those organic conversations. A lot of times, if you're only meeting with them in a classroom end of day, it kind of becomes like mental skills becomes this thing that's almost like an afterthought, and
Yeah.
I feel really fortunate that here at the Mariners, we don't believe that. We think it's kind of the foundation of everything, and so it should always start with that. So we get to be in the cages, we get to be in their bullpens, we get to be out while they're doing throwing program or defensive work, and a lot of times we're not specifically talking about mental skills, but we're building the relationships that'll allow that. And then when those opportunities pop up, or players will sometimes bring situations to us or just questions to us of like, hey, I noticed this showed up for me, or what if this situation happens? And so then we'll kind of talk through it with them at that point. That being said, we also can at times, especially during things like camps or spring training, we'll have certain like, okay, every Monday or every camp day, we're gonna have a 30-minute presentation. We'll sit you guys down, have a conversation. So it's a good blend of those things. The coaches are also really great too, in the sense that like if I were to go out to an affiliate and they have a hitters meeting, it's probably about 10 minutes before they get ready to head out, and just say, hey, can I have 5 minutes at the end of that? And they're like, they're eager. They want us to talk to the players as much as possible. We don't really have to fight for time, which is awesome. So we get pretty much, we have a lot of flex. If we want to make it happen, we kind of just have to ask it. They'll make it happen for us, which is great.
That's awesome. It's great to hear that they prioritize it as much as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a kid, whenever I stepped on any kind of stage, the nerves immediately took over me. So finding
Yeah.
that mind to body connection, that sounds amazing.
Yes. And we
But
all wish we had it.
yeah, definitely. And I mean, hopefully people start implementing it earlier so that you can really hone in by the time you get to the big stage. So
Definitely.
that was all of my questions. Thank you, Stephanie. It was great meeting you.
Perfect. Yes, you
Yeah,
too.
it's great to hear that there's a whole department just kind of honed into a player's mental health. So yeah, great to hear all about your techniques and just your role in general.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.